Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're enjoying this early autumn. Here in New England, it's about 65 degrees, nice breeze, the leaves are rustling. I know down south it's hot and miserable. It's coming, but we're enjoying it now. Hey, I want to turn to Psalm 119, verse 81 today. Psalm 119, verse 81. You know, Psalm 119 is about the Word of God. And every verse in it talks about the Word of God somehow. And so we're looking at that today for two reasons. First of all, I believe the Psalms give us the mind of Christ as he walked this earth. When David said, or God said of David, he's a man after my own heart, what David writes is what Jesus was thinking as he walked around. There's a second reason I love the Psalms, and that's because they look at us the way we are. Hebrews 4:15 says, "We have not a high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities, but was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin." Psalm 119 in this particular passage talks about you and me when we get discouraged, disgruntled, and generally can't figure out what God is doing. He starts out, "My soul fainteth for thy salvation, but I hope in thy word." Well, it's not the primary thought I want to talk about today. How many times do we look for God, and we look for God, and we look for God, and just about the time we're ready to give up, we tie a knot in the rope, and we sit on the knot, and we look for God, and we look for God, and we look for God, and when we can't stand sitting on the knot any longer, we pull ourselves up, and we are just about ready to let go. And God says, "I'm glad you came to this meeting. I'm about to teach you some patience." The difference between the child of God and the average person who reads the scriptures is this last part. "I hope in thy word." David didn't say that I'm looking in my feeling, I'm trying to suck it up. He said, "I hope in thy word." God, you made some promises, and I know that you're going to keep them. And even though it doesn't look like it, I know that you're going to keep them. "My eyes fail for thy word, saying, when wilt thou comfort me?" I run into people all the time who are saved saying, "When is Jesus going to come?" I just saw in today's news, if you're still looking for me, Donna, yeah, okay, I didn't know if you'd gotten that. I saw in today's news that the mayor of New York City wants to fine people $250,000 if they dare to use the phrase illegal alien. This world is getting crazy. Alien does not mean someone from outer space. Alien means someone who is not a citizen of a country and has no right to be there. Why it is today so criminal to simply use words in their natural sense, I'll never understand. Every day, it seems like the world gets crazier. We've got governments going crazy. We have people begging the government to do things the government just ignores and rolls over. And it just gets so frustrating. But David said, don't care. Don't care. But here's the phrase that I want to talk about today. "For I am become like a bottle in the smoke, yet do I not forget thy statutes." Back in the day when Israel wandered through the wilderness, or once they were settled, a common home. Bottles were not made of glass like they are today. They were made of animal skin. A bottle that's used constantly would be stretched and then shrink. It would be wet from the inside because of whatever liquid you put into it, or if you put it dry, you could put dry things in it. And the bottle constantly was stretched and contracted, stretched and contracted. It kept life in the skin. If you took it from a goat, it looked like goat skin. If you took it from something else, it looked like whatever it was. But if a bottle didn't get used, you hung it from a peg or a nail in the house, quite often near the fire. And day by day, smoke would come up around the bottle. It would get dry, and it would get dark because it wasn't being used. The psalmist here says, I am become, not I'm becoming, it's already been done, like a bottle in the smoke. God, when are you going to use me? Have you ever felt that way? Lord, when are you going to use me? I read in the Bible how you want to use me, and yet whenever I try, I get frustrated. My health won't let me be used. My location won't let me be used. My training won't let me be used. It always seems like being used is sometime in the future. I remember being in Bible college thinking Jesus would come before I got out. He didn't. I've been out for a long time now. When am I going to be used? How many times have I been used? When am I going to be used again? The whole of the Christian life is being used. You can go back in the scriptures, you can go back in your own life, and we are happiest when we know that God is using us for his purposes. The biggest use God has for us is to win other people to Christ. I know that's when I get frustrated. When it's been a while since I've shown somebody how they can know for sure they're going to heaven, know for sure their sins are forgiven, know for sure they're a child of God, I get frustrated. I really get frustrated. I start looking. I try to force the issue. And you know, the harder we try, the Pennsylvania Dutch say, the behinder we get. You can't make a person get saved any more than you can make a green apple turn red. You and I can go out every day and we can pull on a twig in the ground and hope that it'll grow, but it won't. We can go out every day and we can pick a green apple hoping it'll taste good, but it won't. And we can try to win somebody to Christ who's not ready to get saved. We might get a profession, they may pray, they may talk, but in their heart of hearts they're never not been saved. And it's a hard place to be. This is just being a preacher. But I know when it starts to bother me, and this is going to sound a little weird, but it starts to bother me when I have a dream that I'm trying to preach, but I'm not dressed. And I know people can see me and I'm embarrassed. I don't belong there that way. You say, well, what are you talking about? I don't belong telling other people how to win people to Christ if I don't do it myself. And I start to feel like a bottle hung in the smoke. You ever been there? You're a mom, you're a dad, you're trying to raise kids to serve God, and they just don't seem to take. And think, man, I'm a bottle in the smoke. Had my grandson with me. Love my grandkids. Just love my grandkids. You love your grandkids more than you love your own kids, if you have any good sense. The boy, I mean to tell, all he asked me before he left, Bob, do I need to take any more days off? Or you got any more trips? The boy thinks it is his God-given responsibility to go with me and take care of me wherever I go, and that's a blessing. But it took him to a church where they'll tell you how to get saved at the drop of a hat, and they'll drop the hat. He's got a ponytail about 1.5 feet long. That's not the norm there, let me just tell you. And his bag has Dungeons and Dragons on it. And they just know that he's of the devil. And there were some other things that I knew. And I said to him, Joe, you better stay close to me or they're going to try to win you to Christ. Now, the boy has a testimony, but he's got some kinks that got to get worked out. I would love to be able to have an influence on him. I think the boy could be called to preach. I think he has the intelligence, he has the integrity, he has everything right now but the appearance. We go someplace, we talk, I feed, I talk, he talks, we talk, back and forth. But I still feel like a bottle in the smoke because I don't see him making that last jump. Now, I don't want him grandfather called. I don't want him mama called. I want him God called. And if God hasn't called him yet, then I can't do anything. I'm like a bottle in the smoke, just getting darker and darker from not being used. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26. 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26. I'm glad this verse has the letter M in it. But the Apostle Paul wrote, For you see your calling, brethren, how that not many wise after the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called. You say, Preacher, we talk about, I'm glad for the letter M. It doesn't say not any wise. It says not many wise. See, being used to God doesn't depend on my abilities. I've known some preachers who you think aren't smart enough to stop at a stop sign. I've seen some that are as crass and common as can be. I've seen some that are frail and weak. Spurgeon wouldn't let a kid into his Bible college years ago unless he had a barrel chest. He said God wouldn't call a man who doesn't have the capabilities. And back then, without microphones, you had to reach an auditorium of 300. But God said not many, not any. Just take a look at what God gives us. We could go back in and I'm trying to get my notes to stop dancing in front of me. I've been having trouble reading all day today. Come on now, get up there. We can look at the law. You go back through the law of Moses, there was provision for sickness. There's whole chapters on how to diagnose leprosy, how to know when it's been healed, how to know when it's dangerous, how to know what to do about it. There's provision for disobedience. Israel should never have had a juvenile delinquent. God said if a child raised his hand to his parents, he was to be taken out and stoned. That's some serious law. There was provision for poverty. God had a way. He said, when you harvest the field, you just swing your harvesters on a smooth curve. You don't clean the corners. You leave that for the poor. God's welfare system, he made provision for people who didn't have things, but not without work. I just found out, state of Massachusetts just added a tax, as if we don't have enough, but added a tax so that you can take family leave. Now, I don't know how it's going to work, and I don't really care because I have no intention of taking family leave. But I didn't find that in the Bible. I just find things where God meets. See you, Pastor Rashid. Where God meets our needs. Look at the patriarchs. Look at Abraham. Look how God watched him all through things, and yet the Bible said he looked for a city whose builder and maker was God. All week, family leave, Donna, so you can take 4 months off and watch your baby grow up. Insanity. Abraham looked for a city whose maker and founder or builder was God. Every time he turned a sand dune, he expected to see the city of God. Every time he climbed a hill or dropped into a valley, he expected to look and in the distance see the mountain of God rise with the city of God on top of it. How do you keep patience? He waited for a boy to be born. God said Isaac would be born. Abraham waited. He was 70 years old. He was 80 years old. He was 90 years old. He was 100 years old. A bottle in the smoke. We think that God should be running by our calendar. And God says, no, it doesn't work that way. And we fuss and we get frustrated. And time just keeps going on. You say, God, you may be eternal, but I'm not. I'm getting older. When am I going to do the thing that you called me to do? Look at the apostles. They walked into the world with no possessions, no creature comforts, and carried the gospel across the world. Why? Because once God was ready, he used them. 3.5 years, God was preparing 12 apostles minus one. 3.5 years, and finally, it was their turn. Look what Paul said. 2 Corinthians, chapter 11, verse 23. Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I am more. In labor, more abundant. In stripes, above measure. In prison, more frequent. In death, often. Of the Jews, 5 times received I 40 stripes, save one. Thrice I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. Thrice I suffered shipwreck. A night and a day I've been in the deep. I don't envy him swimming around with sharks in the Mediterranean. In journeyings, often. Paul walked the full length from eastern Turkey all the way to the Straits of Gibraltar, if we're right that he visited Spain. He sailed from Israel, spent days in the water. In peril of water, in peril of robbers, in peril by my own countrymen, in peril by the heathen, in peril in the city, in peril in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren. Man, I'd just like to have a ministry without somebody or something trying to kill me. In weariness, painfulness, watchings, hunger and thirst, fasting, cold and nakedness. Hey, when you read that list, do we really have anything to complain about? Beside those things that are without, that which comes upon me daily, the care of all the churches. Who's weak and I'm not weak? Who's offended and I burn not? If I must needs glory, I'll glory of the things which concern my infirmities. Paul ended up the last years of his ministry, which should have been the greatest, sitting in jail. I'm a bottle in the smoke. But you know what happened to Paul? All these things he just mentions here. And in the loneliness of a Roman prison, he picked up pen and ink, and he wrote Ephesians, Colossians, Philippians. He lifted us above everything else. While he thought he was a nobody, doing nothing for the cause of Christ, he wrote the books of the New Testament that give us the highest definition of our calling as Christians. A bottle in the smoke, that's what we feel like, not what God sees us as. We got that verse they love to call us on, 3 John 2, Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper, be in good health, even as thy soul prospers. Yeah, I'd love to see everything work the way it's supposed to. But you know what life is? Mostly trials and waiting for new trials. Time leaves its footprints as it crosses our foreheads. Dry and wrinkled skin. Now the newest ad is how to get rid of crepey skin. I know how to get rid of crepey skin. Go to heaven. Life sucks the life out of the strength and vigor. But you know what? If you wait until everything's perfect to serve God, you'll never serve God. 2 Corinthians 4:16 says, For which cause we faint not. For though our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day. God says the more frustrated, the older, the weaker I become, the greater I become within. I used to believe that a preacher didn't come into his prime until he was at least 50. How do you preach on the family until you've raised your family? How do you preach on marriage until you've had a marriage? How do you preach on life, the frustrations, until you've been through them? How do you know victory till you know defeat? I'm as a bottle in the smoke. David went on, How many are the days of thy servant? When wilt thou execute judgment on them that persecute me? David said, How long is this going to go on, God? How long is this going to go on? When do I get justice? And then I remember, oh my, if I had gotten justice, I wouldn't have been here. I didn't want justice then. I wanted mercy. I'm a bottle in the smoke. And I begin to understand. The proud have digged pits for me, which are not after thy law. But where am I? I'm hanging safely in the smoke. All thy commandments are faithful. They persecute me wrongfully. Help thou me. I know you told the truth. Your word can't fail. I just don't feel like it is. Feelings don't matter. Isaiah 55:11. Here's the promise of God. So shall my word be that goes forth out of my mouth. It shall not return unto me void. It shall accomplish that which I please, and it shall prosper in the thing whereto I have sent it. So when? Does it matter? I'm a bottle in the smoke. They had almost consumed me upon the earth. I forsook not thy precepts. God, I did everything. I gave up everything else for you. I hang on your word. Nothing else matters. Kind of like the pioneers who started from their homes in their east. They loaded a wagon, left the rest behind. And as they went, the livestock died off. As they went, the wagons broke down. They traded for new. Their clothes wore out. Their dreams faded. And then they got to the Rockies. Mile by mile upward they went, emptying the wagons to make the climb. Everything precious, a parade of pianos and bureaus and furniture and clothes and all kinds of things, till they reached the top. Bottles in the smoke. And then they looked down and saw the other side, and it was worth it all. They made it with less than they started with, but with far more in front of them than was behind them. And so he says, quicken me or revive me after thy loving kindness. So shall I keep the testimony of thy mouth. Revive me. I need it every so often, Lord. Fill me, I leak. But I'm going to believe your word no matter what. Father, would you bless your word today again? Just a thought when we get to complaining. Lord, you didn't promise us a pink primrose path. You told us it'd be a struggle all the way. The devil would fight us, the world would fight us, our friends would fight us, our flesh would fight us. But you told us to trust you, that it would be worth it all. And Father, we're counting on it when we get there, even though we feel like a bottle in the smoke.